Now, without further ado, let's welcome Richard White, Enterprise Customer Success Manager, and Byron Canody, Strategic Partner Manager at Open Sesame. Richard, the session is yours.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody. I'd like to certainly start with, I know we've mentioned the chat, but we'd like this to be a conversation as much as just me talking at you for the next 40 minutes or so. So please use the chat. Let us know. The assumption is that you're here because L&D budgets are something maybe on your mind. And I'd like to understand some of your challenges so that we can use some of the pauses and the Q&A at the end to address sort of anything that you want to bring up, anything you want to talk about. And like I said, I will pause a couple of times through this to see if there is any questions coming in. So here we are. Again, my name is Richard White. I'm an Enterprise Customer Success Manager at Open Sesame. I've been in the education space for about 12 years now, the last 6 years being at Open Sesame. And one of the things I enjoy very much doing is working and consulting with organizations to look at consolidating their spend and therefore increasing their return of investment in their training. So why we're here? Some fun facts for our industry that our marketing folks were kind enough to share with me recently. So apparently, companies in the US spend an average of $1,200 per employee on training. Now, of course, that's going to incorporate a number of different things, the cost of the learning management system, employees to manage the learning side of things, instructional designers, and then content as well. But it certainly adds up. And as of today, the market size of global corporate e-learning is just shy of $400 billion and is expected to grow nearly 20% over the next few years. One of the things I got from a recent study I looked at from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is that as of today, 37% of people in a 2002 survey, so this is during the Great Resignation, stated that lack of access to career development opportunities, which includes training, was why they left their last role. So that's obviously saying to us that a lot of people really care about having access to learning and development in their career. And the survey went on to talk about other things where people actually care more about training and development more than they do salary on average. So what are the common challenges that we have in most organizations? And this is just coming from many, many conversations with a lot of different organizations, and I'm sure this list is not exhaustive. But one of the top three, I would say, challenges is people of influence, so stakeholders, business partners, whatever terminology you use, just don't know where they can get content from, or more importantly, they'll go and source it for themselves. So different departments will use their own budget, go off, find content, bring it in for their teams. And this is unbeknownst to the L&D or HR teams that are actually managing this. Siloed budgets, definitely. Same sort of scenario. Often I've seen duplicate spending going on. One department is purchasing content that is already maybe available that another department has already spent money on as well. So we see that happen a lot. And the left hand not necessarily knowing what the right hand is doing. So there's a lot of decentralized, I guess, learning that's going on and spending. Specialist content needs as well. So often this might come in the form of instructional designers creating content, but that special content that is very unique to a skill set, perhaps that has always traditionally been purchased or created internally. Multiple LMSs. I see this all the time. I have a customer right now who has right now 7 different LMSs across their organization, and they have a project over the next couple of years to whittle that down to no more than 2. But that's still, unnecessary. People not knowing where to necessarily they need to log into, multiple places to have to go and take your learning. It becomes quite confusing and quite expensive. We also find that instructional designers are usually have a backlog of a number of different courses that have to be built. And there's only so many hours in the day and so many days in the week and so on. So actual bandwidth for creating the content that is needed is tricky. And so do you buy more do you hire more instructional designers, or do you look for off-the-shelf content instead to ease their burden, and so that they make the content that is more relevant to your organization, and your standard content like compliance, for example, is just off the shelf in the LMS, ready to go. Keeping up with changing regulations as well, that's a tricky one. Often when if you are in some of the key states like California, Illinois, and then Chicago has even more requirements, New York, Connecticut, there are specific regulations around sexual harassment training, bystander intervention that have to be kept up to date because those regulations are changing all the time. Do you have the bandwidth to keep those courses that you're building up to date? And then, of course, managing multiple vendors. Challenging question for you. When was the last time anyone here bought a CD or a DVD? We don't, because we all now have subscriptions, and subscriptions make sense. And the nice thing about having a subscription is you don't have to have multiple vendors. So going directly to someone who develops content and signing a contract with them. This takes man hours, it takes resources, relationship management, all of those things. So what is the opportunity to look at consolidating your overall spend? Some of this isn't rocket science, I will admit, but of course it is going to reduce cost. And also the strategy. As I said earlier, more and more people these days care about their careers. People are moving jobs far more often. I used to work in the recruitment industry, and if someone had on their resume or CV more than 2 or 3 jobs that they'd only had for 2 or 3 years, we consider them a job hopper. Nowadays, that's the average. So having a strategy that helps grow within, cross-train, upskill, all of those sorts of things is going to retain your employees longer as well. I believe on average, it costs somewhere between $4,800 and $5,200 to recruit someone on average in the US. So if you're keeping 10 people for 6 months longer because they're in a certification program or leadership program, then there is an indirect cost saving that comes with that. And also sort of protecting resources as well, and additionally creating centralized organizational vision. So what are we all here to do? What does leadership expect from us? And therefore, how are we allocating those resources in order to achieve the goals that we're setting out to do? If departments are just doing their own thing, then that doesn't all come together, and we're not on the same page. Also, and I have actually had this happen multiple times with candidates, with customers, I have seen organizations go as far as to include having a diverse library of training available as a benefit to the organization. And as such, even at the recruitment stage, that is discussed right along with your insurance, your salary, your time off, all those things. That is attractive to candidates to bring them into your organization and take them from your competitors. So then where do we go from here? So then we want to start looking at where are we actually spending our dollars? It's not enough just to have a learning management system, content sat within it that people can just come and take. It's where are we allocating it? How do we make these programs more sticky, to use a sales term, within our organization? So I've seen the more that people network and get out into the organization, the more successful they're going to be. So what are we doing around cybersecurity? And, with the advent of AI now starting to take over, how is that playing a bigger part? Compliance, that's the obvious one. And safety, if that's a part of your industry. Even continuing education, so certifications. Something that we'll talk about in a little bit is certification prep or maintenance. A lot of organizations will do reimbursement programs. So I've completed a certification and I can expense that. What if that training was available off the shelf instead of that individual doing their own thing and then the company paying them back for that? Leadership development, we're certainly seeing a lot. Well, that's probably the number one undertaken type of content. But also we're seeing that there is kind of an epidemic, and you don't have to scroll through LinkedIn very far to see a lot of folks discussing this, that there's not just the how-to leadership development. There's also the humanistic part. There's a lot of toxic leadership going on, a lot of tickets in HR seeing from this. And so, training that not just looks at how do I have a one-on-one? How do I have a difficult conversation? How do I give feedback? But also, how do I lead from behind? How do I inspire others? Things like that. This is one of the stats that is out there, and this is not certainly unknown knowledge, is that people leave their manager predominantly, not the company. So reinforcing those leaders and training them up to be better leaders and better human beings has in itself a huge return of investment just in that side of things. So there's a lot of different categories that are available. There's still many companies out there that just check the compliance box, and that's about it. And we are starting to see, and the industry absolutely sees, that the companies that are not providing a holistic catalog of training for their employees, whether it be mandatory or self-elected, are suffering as a result, and people are going elsewhere where there is more robust opportunities available. So we can talk on a couple of these, DE&I, leadership and management, we've already said. Technology is huge. We're seeing a massive uptick, especially, again, with AI. Again, we talked about certifications. There's a lot out there that people can do that instantly goes on their resume, and all of that is available off the shelf. So it's kind of an example of where we've seen what can occur. This is a real customer that I had. I've anonymized this, but this is a customer going back 3 years now. We simply had a conversation with their L&D team. Is there any additional spending going on within your organization? And the answer I got was, I don't think so, but I'll check into it. I get an email that I'll never forget a couple months later. Hi, Richard. I'm embarrassed to admit that we've just discovered that not only our environmental health and safety team, but our IT teams have not only content that they're purchasing outside of what our L&T team does, but also some LMSs as well. And they very kindly, they didn't have to, but they shared this spreadsheet. And the only changes I've made on here is to anonymize some things here. But to show you kind of exactly what they laid out, what's in orange is what they were doing out of their L&D team. They had some licenses from Open Sesame, and they had their own LMS, again, who I've anonymized, and they had a small anti-harassment training contract as well that was coming to an end that year. They then discovered underneath here that their IT team had an LMS, and that LMS also sold them content. Exactly the same for EHS. Again, they didn't have to, but they did tell me how much they were spending, which actually gives us a really good view of kind of how this all breaks down. So when all was said and done, they were spending about $250,000 a year on training. I met with their IT team. I met with their EHS team. We found out what content they needed, what the topics were. We curated equivalents to that content, and were able to have them basically walk away from these contracts with these other vendors and consolidate through what we were doing. When all was said and done, they actually ended up needing to purchase more licenses from Open Sesame, so great for us, pleased with that. But despite that, this organization, and it's grown since then, it's been a couple of years, they are actually saving, or were saving, $70,000 a year just from consolidating where they were getting their content from. Slightly differently, and actually I'll pause here. Is there any questions, comments that have come in? Byron, if you wouldn't mind chiming in.
Nothing at this time that I see, Richard.
No worries. Just thought I'd check in. Okay. Separate example. This is a research university, and they have budgets that are separate for each department within that organization. I was just working with their facilities team, so about 350 people, but they have 4,000 people on campus. The cost of 350 licenses with most subscriptions is a lot more than 4,000. But then we've got this budgetary thing going on. So my counterpart in this context has gone out and met with each department, learned where their training is coming from, and therefore then able to come back to me and say, okay, we're going to handle the budget on our side. We'll just kind of put that together, and then we'll purchase 4,000 licenses from you. And it's working out at about a 30% reduction in cost overall for them. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it runs in the tens of thousands in terms of savings. So then we've got what I would refer to as the programmatic approach. So what else is going on in our organization that training can either support or can be further consolidated? I won't read all of these verbatim, but there's a couple of good examples in here. Someone's been on board as an individual contributor for a year or two. So what is their path to furthering their career, role mastery? Have you got established employee resource groups? And all of these are topics that absolutely there is training for. Wellness, mental health, we've seen a huge uptick on that side of things as well, kind of I call it the post-COVID hangover and, climate stress, things like that. There is a lot more that organizations can and want to do to enable employees to continue being at work, happy, in a good mental state, and not taking FMLA or extended time off or even leaving because they're burnt out or something like that. So mental health, wellness, training, guidance, all plays a part in employee satisfaction, health, wellness, and so on. So when we look at these internal programs, what a lot of my counterparts in my customers will do is, and it's very straightforward, but to look at what are some of the programs and initiatives that we are doing in our organization. Who is the stakeholder for those? Bring them into your network, meet with them, talk with them. Just a 15, 20-minute informational. Where are you getting content from? How can we help? And how many dollars are being spent on that? Or you could just break it down by category. So whether it's soft skills, business skills, safety and compliance, certifications, industry specific, and going through all of these and looking at, well, what training are we currently doing? Do we have any gaps? So we're not actually providing any training on any certifications, whether we have project managers or whether it's Six Sigma or Amazon Web Services. All of these people will have certifications in. That's probably why they were hired. So how are we helping them achieve those certifications or even maintain those certifications? A couple of other opportunities that we have is, and I gave this webinar a couple of years ago, and at that time, I wasn't really talking about this side of things. Someone spoke up in the chat and they said, I'm not at a position in my organization where I feel comfortable going out to someone who might be a senior director or even a VP and saying, hey, you might be spending money that you shouldn't be because we have another vendor that we can get that content from. That seems a little accusatory. It might put them in an uncomfortable situation. So it got me thinking a little bit. And then what I've done more since then with individuals who do put themselves into that category as well, you have a procurement team, do you not? And often the answer is yes. And so how can they help you? It's their job. They're incentivized to help save the organization money. So what is your procurement policy? Do you have a line item for training? What's the minimum before it has to go through procurement? And therefore, do they have eyes on how many contracts you have with all these different vendors that you might be getting content from? And then they can act as your champion in going to the individuals to inquire as to, can we maybe allocate that budget somewhere else? So it's not about losing budget, it's just about reorganizing it and putting it somewhere else. And frankly, can you consolidate through one vendor? There is a number of organizations, not just Open Sesame. We're not here just to plug Open Sesame, but there is a few organizations out there where they're not siloed into one specialization, like safety or leadership and management, something like that. Instead, they'll have content in a vast array of categories. So just finding the right vendor is as important as understanding what you're spending money on in the first place. And really consolidating instructor-led training. I know I've alluded to this kind of already, but when I first started in this industry, one of my first comments when I was being trained was, subscription services must be a threat to instructional designers and to trainers. And I couldn't have been more wrong. As I said, there is only so many hours in the day, and almost 99.9% of the time, folks that I'm working with, the teams are small and there's only so much that they can do. And so being able to take the easy, low-hanging, off-the-shelf content and put that out whilst then focusing on your industry-specific, company-specific training really frees up their time. So it ends up being a huge benefit and a really good partnership. We already discussed training certification programs as well. Perhaps procurement will know if there are those, or HR, if there are those reimbursement programs. And I'm going to flip around a couple of slides. So just to go back to these, when you're gathering who is responsible for training so that you really understand outside of L&D, who are those stakeholders across these examples, then a hugely valuable next step that we see be successful a lot is to bring those folks into a committee, a group that meets fairly regularly, whether they're department managers, subject matter experts, whether they're just leaders of large departments, whoever your executive sponsor is always important, and even some of your heavy power user learners in your organization, and have that committee come together to really align on the overall strategy across the organization so that people, again, aren't off doing rogue things. And then lastly, we've got by department as well. So what different departments do we have? What is our ecosystem? Who are the people that I need to talk to? And what are their budgets? What are they spending money on? So I'll pause here again. Any comments, thoughts, feedback, anything I might be missing? I'm always here to learn as well.
No questions in the Q&A, but
so in short, it's important to uncover exactly where duplicate spending might be occurring, what budgets that is coming from, and if it really helps, seek out that procurement support, look at sort of what is being spent through them instead and have them be your champion. And then just build your network. Networking is absolutely vital in this. Look at who your stakeholders and core, and therefore the core learning committee as well, by department, by programs, by initiatives. And then last 2 points, seek out content providers that provide content in as many categories as possible so that you reduce the number of vendors that you're having to lean on and manage to get the content training that you need. And finally, just bring awareness to where exactly training is coming from. One of the strategies there is to make it well known who people can reach out to if training is required. So the L&D team, whether it's a Google form, hi, I'm so-and-so from this department. I need to provide training on XYZ to X number of people. I need it to be in these languages or less than 30 minutes, whatever it might be. And that comes to a central place. Another technique here as well is to create, if you haven't, a team of instructional designers, someone who can create a short 4 or 5 minute training that can be put into your LMS that is provided during onboarding so that people know how to log into the LMS, where to find content, what's available. And then for leaders, if you have additional requirements, again, this is who you reach out to, and then have that training be mandatory for every new employee as they come through the door. So definitely want to open it up to some conversation. If anybody has anything they want to add, talk about, any challenges you're facing that I haven't addressed. Or we can wrap up in a nice, tidy 30 minutes.
We have a really quiet group going on. I think maybe they're waiting for their holiday break to come up. Now, Richard, this information was absolutely fantastic. ELB Learning does the same thing, considering we have so many options when it comes to services or products, to have it all under one roof and have maybe one representative where you go for your issues, questions, concerns, help, all that stuff, and also one person for your billing. It's kind of nice as well. And I guess one of the things that I took away from this is talk to the other supervisors that are around you and ask them how they're building their budget. What are they putting in their budget? There's a possibility of being able to share resources. I mean, how many companies literally share their resources when it comes to people? You got a person who is a half-time over in one department, a half-time over in another department. And if you're spending so much on the same resources and you could actually consolidate, then both of you could benefit and possibly spend that money elsewhere doing great things within your department.
I think it's an easy thing to assume, oh, well, that budget goes away and I'll lose it for next year. Most of the time, that's often not the case. There is always going to be other things that we can spend that money on, just to be more nimble, more efficient. So there is the case of consolidating to save money, but at the same time, it could also just be, all right, well, let's just reallocate that money to something that we didn't have the budget for previously. So there's certainly two sides to the coin. And the reason why I talk about procurement is it really has been quite common that I've spoken to individuals who have said, I don't feel comfortable going out and having these conversations. I'm just not in that place in my career. So that's where procurement really going to do that job for you. And I've genuinely had seen a lot of success in doing that, because that's their motivation. That's what they're there to do.
Where have you seen pushback when you've been talking to people about possible consolidation? What can these people expect possibly when it comes to the no's or the I don't think so's?
It's actually been fascinating to see. I work with a lot of very large organizations, and it'd be easy to assume that everyone's motivated to do this, but really what it comes down to is time. I've not yet met an organization who have more than a handful of people. Whether you've got 4,000 or 40,000 employees, most teams are extremely lean. So the motivation's there. It's often just the time to do it. So these initiatives really often have to come from the top down. So, your executive sponsor, whoever's signing off on the budget for your L&D program, they need to kind of be getting behind you to free up or allocate additional resources in order to be able to have all of these conversations and really look at your organization across the board to determine, what improvements we can make. Because it's not something you can just do overnight. I've seen consolidation projects take years. Again, it depends on the size of the organization. So ultimately, the big challenge is often just time.
Got it. Byron, do you have anything to add to this?
Richard's experience in this area as far outweighs my own, but we do understand that this kind of knowledge as we move into what is relatively, when you consider like L&D programs and training on a fully asynchronous digital scale, can easily spin out of control as one side of the org doesn't know what the other is doing. So we're always happy to provide context and consultation in terms of how we can improve that experience.
So a couple of final thoughts. I don't have source material for this, but it wouldn't surprise me if there is billions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars being, I'll use an aggressive term, wasted on duplicate spending, unnecessary spending in the US and globally. And it's a real shame to see, especially when the economy right now is feeling a pinch a little bit. So the other observation I've made is, like with that customer example before, the one that sent me the spreadsheet. When I initially asked the question, do you believe there's any other, I call it rogue spending going on? Their initial answer was no, I don't think so. And they couldn't have been more wrong. So you've really got to turn those stones over to figure out where spending is going on, and not just assume, well, we have an L&D team, so they must have it covered. because they don't always know what's going on.
Got it. So do we have any questions? If so, I guess you can pop them over to the chat because it's not going very fast. We've got a lot of quiet people here. They're just chilling, which is perfectly fine. It's just before the holidays. Or maybe they're all bots. I don't know. Well, no matter what, I think this is probably a great spot for us to wrap it up and say thank you so much for being here, Richard and Byron. We appreciate you guys and being partners of ELB Learning. And also to those of you who took time out of your day to be here, we appreciate you as well. And it looks like we're going to be able to give you about 30 minutes back to your day. So enjoy your holidays, and we will see you in 2025. Take care.